April 5, 1945. Combined Fleet Headquarters, Hoshi. The final orders. Rain drummed against the windows as Admiral Sumu Toyota's staff officers gathered around the operations table. The dispatch from Imperial General Headquarters lay before them, its characters spelling out what everyone knew was a death sentence. Operation Tenno, Surface Special Attack Force to sortie for Okinawa. Mission: beach the battleship Yamato and fight as a stationary fortress until destroyed. Vice Admiral Ryanosake Kosaka set down his teacup and reached for the secure telephone. 1 battleship, 1 light cruiser, 8 destroyers would face the entire American Fifth Fleet. The USS Bunker Hill, the USS Enterprise, the USS Essex. What none of them fully grasped was that this single desperate mission would trigger the most devastating carrier airstrike against a surface warship in naval history. The Pacific War had taught Japanese commanders that battleships were no longer queens of the ocean. They were targets. Sink those battleships and the Imperial Navy's last pretense of power would vanish. The Imperial Japanese Navy's Second Fleet had been reduced to a shadow of its former strength. 1 operational battleship, Yamato. Her sister ship, Musashi, had been sunk 6 months earlier in the Sibuyan Sea. Shinano, converted to an aircraft carrier, lasted only 10 days after commissioning before American submarines sent her to the bottom. The USS Bunker Hill sliced through Pacific swells at 25 knots, her Essex-class hull displacing 27,100 tons of seawater. Vice Admiral Marc Mitscher stood on the flag bridge studying intelligence reports. His Task Force 58 commanded 386 aircraft spread across 11 fleet carriers and 6 light carriers. Mitscher, commanding from Bunker Hill, led a force specifically designed to project American air power across vast ocean distances. F-6F Hellcats for fighter cover, SB-2C Helldivers for dive bombing, and mounted in the bomb bays of TBF Avengers, the weapon that would make history, the Mark 13 aerial torpedo. The Mark 13 represented American engineering refined through 3 years of combat experience. Unlike the early war models that ran erratically and often failed to detonate, the improved Mark 13 could be dropped at 260 knots from 800 feet. Each torpedo carried 600 pounds of Torpex explosive. American pilots had learned to concentrate attacks on one side of enemy ships to induce catastrophic listing that prevented counter-flooding. Commander James D. Rayage, Air Group commander aboard Enterprise, had studied Japanese ship construction until he could sketch Yamato's armor scheme from memory. Born in Waterville, Iowa with a degree in aeronautical engineering, Ramage understood that sinking Yamato required precise coordination, multiple torpedo hits below the armor belt, bomb strikes to knock out anti-aircraft positions. The difference between mission success and catastrophic losses would come down to timing and overwhelming force concentration. Aboard the Japanese battleship Yamato, Captain Kosaku Aruga reviewed the mission orders for the 10th time. On April 6, Yamato would take on 3,400 tons of fuel oil at Tokoyama Depot. The depot personnel, in secret defiance of orders to provide only enough fuel for a one-way mission, would give the task force 60% of their fuel capacity rather than the 40% authorized. While theoretically enough for a round trip at economical speed, combat maneuvering would consume it long before any return. Aruga had commanded destroyers at Midway, had seen the carriers Akagi and Kaga consumed by American dive bombers. He knew what carrier aircraft could do to ships without air protection. Yamato displaced 72, 89 tons fully loaded, powered by 12-con boilers driving 4 steam turbines. Her crew of 3,332 men had survived air attacks at Leyte Gulf, submarine encounters in the Philippine Sea, and near misses during the March raids on Kure. But the battleship's greatest vulnerability remained unchanged since Pearl Harbor. Concentrated air attack from multiple directions simultaneously. The American carriers formed 3 task groups as they steamed toward the intercept position. Task Group 58.1 to the north. Task Group 58.3 to the east. Task Group 58.4 racing to join from refueling operations. Each carrier launched search aircraft in expanding box patterns. The radar operators worked 4-hour shifts, their screens glowing with false returns from wavetops and rain squalls. Aircraft Coordinator Lieutenant Commander Joseph Taylor had been vectoring fighters for 20 months across the Pacific. His hands moved automatically across the radio controls as he managed the complex aerial ballet. Launch cycles every 90 minutes. Combat air patrols at 3 altitudes. Strike groups forming up at predetermined coordinates. The weather was deteriorating. Cloud base at 3,000 feet, rain squalls moving through the area. Visibility varying between 2 and 10 miles. On April 6, 1945, at 1,520 hours, the Yamato Task Force departed Tokayama Harbor. 10 ships with the light cruiser Yahagi in the lead, followed by destroyers with Yamato bringing up the rear. The Emperor himself had asked, "But what about the Navy? What are they doing to assist in defending Okinawa?" This mission was the Navy's answer, a gesture of loyalty that everyone knew was futile. Vice Admiral Seishi Itoto, commanding the Second Fleet from Yamato's bridge, had initially refused the order. Only when told the Emperor expected action did he relent. As the task force sorted through Bango Strait, the narrow passage between Kyushu and Shikoku, 2 American submarines were already waiting. USS Threadfin, commanded by Commander John Joseph Foote, picked up the Japanese force on radar at approximately 1745. 10 contacts in formation, speed 22 knots, course 240 degrees. Foote surfaced briefly to transmit his contact report in clear language, knowing the Japanese would intercept it, but prioritizing speed over security. USS Hackleback, positioned further south, took over surveillance as the Japanese force entered the East China Sea. Commander Frederick Edward Janney tracked them through the night, transmitting 4 detailed position reports despite aggressive screening by Japanese destroyers. At dawn on April 7th, the weather worsened. Cloud cover at 1,500 feet, visibility down to 5 miles in rain squalls. 6 fighters from Keilushu arrived at 0600 to provide air cover as promised. They would remain until 1,000, exactly 4 hours of minimal protection. The fighters orbited at 15,000 feet above the cloud layer, essentially useless against low-level torpedo attacks. Admiral Spruant, commanding 5th Fleet, had ordered his battleships to prepare for surface action. 6 modern battleships with radar-directed 16-inch guns against 1 Japanese battleship already low on fuel. But Vice Admiral Mitscher had other plans. At 0800, without waiting for Spruant's approval, he ordered his carriers to launch strikes. At 0657 on April 7th, the destroyer Asashimo signaled engine trouble and began falling behind. Captain Hiskataki, commanding Destroyer Division 21 aboard Asashimo, ordered emergency repairs, but the damage was beyond his crew's ability to fix at sea. The destroyer fell steadily astern as the task force continued toward Okinawa. Task Group 58.1 and 58.3 began launching at 1,000. The strike package was massive. 132 fighters, 50 dive bombers, 98 torpedo planes. Aircraft from 11 carriers converging on a single target. Fighters would go in first to suppress anti-aircraft fire. Dive bombers would attack from multiple directions to split defensive fire. Torpedo bombers would coordinate their runs to ensure hits on the same side of the target. PBM Mariner flying boats maintained contact, circling just outside gun range, radioing continuous position updates. At 12:20, Yamato's lookout spotted the first wave of American aircraft. Dark specks emerging from clouds growing larger, multiplying. The anti-aircraft guns elevated, tracking targets, waiting for the order to fire. At 12:32, Yamato opened fire with her main battery. 9 18.1-inch guns firing Saniki anti-aircraft shells, 3,200 pounds projectiles that exploded in the air, scattering thousands of incendiary fragments. The shells detonated at preset distances, easily avoided by pilots who simply altered altitude. The massive guns could only fire once per minute in the anti-aircraft role. American aircraft were making attack runs every few seconds. The first coordinated attack came at 12:35. Aircraft from USS Bennington and USS Hornet split into multiple groups. Through the rain and spray, Yamato looked impossibly huge. 863 feet long. Her pagoda superstructure rising 150 feet above the water. Anti-aircraft fire erupted from every gun mount, traces creating a lethal web of steel and fire. At 12:37, the first torpedo hit Yamato's port side near the aft secondary battery. The explosion sent a column of water 100 feet into the air. 2 minutes later, a second torpedo struck Porter midship. Then a 1,000 pounds bomb penetrated the deck near the aft 6.1 in turret, starting fires that would burn until the ship sank. Damage control parties raced to flood compartments on the starboard side to correct the developing list, but the hits kept coming faster than they could respond. At 12:30, the destroyer Asashimo, still struggling with engine problems, was caught by aircraft from USS San Jacinto. Unable to maneuver effectively, she took multiple bomb and torpedo hits. She sank with all hands. 326 crew members, including Captain Kosaku. No survivors were recovered. At 12:43, the destroyer Hamikaze took a direct bomb hit on her bridge, killing her captain and most of the bridge crew. Burning and out of control, she was finished off by torpedo bombers. 242 men died with her. Yahagi, the light cruiser, was simultaneously under attack by aircraft from 3 different carriers. Multiple bomb and torpedo hits left her dead in the water, burning furiously. By 1300, Yamato had taken at least 5 torpedo hits, all on the port side. Her list had increased to 15 degrees despite counter-flooding. Speed had dropped to 18 knots. The second wave was already forming up. 100 aircraft from task groups 58.1 and 58.3. Fresh pilots with full ammunition loads against a wounded giant that could no longer maneuver effectively. The torpedo bombers coordinated their attacks with practiced precision. 3 divisions approaching from different bearings, all targeting the port side. At 13:42, 3 more torpedoes hit port side. Yamato's list increased to 20 degrees. Water was flooding through damaged hatches, entering spaces that should have been watertight. The assistant damage control officer reported to Captain Aruga that counterflooding was no longer possible. All void spaces on the starboard side were already flooded. Vice Admiral Ito recognized the inevitable. At 13:50, he ordered the cancellation of Operation Tango. Signal flags went up, ordering the surviving destroyers to rescue survivors. But Yamato's radio rooms were destroyed. Communication with the rest of the fleet was only possible by visual signals through the smoke and spray. At 14:02, Captain Aruga gave the order to abandon ship, but the list was already approaching 30 degrees, making movement on deck nearly impossible. Men slid down the tilting deck into the water. Others were trapped below as hatches jammed or passages flooded. The Emperor's portrait was removed from the bridge and handed to a junior officer with orders to survive. Executive Officer Captain Jiro Namura tried to convince Aruga to leave the bridge. The captain refused, ordering Namura to save himself. Aruga lashed himself to the compass binnacle with rope, determined to go down with his ship. Vice Admiral Ito retired to his cabin, refusing all entreaties to abandon ship. At 14:07, another torpedo hit starboard side, the only hit on that side during the entire battle. The impact was barely noticed as Yamato's list had already passed 35 degrees. Men were jumping from the high side, falling 60 feet or more to the water. The massive 18.1 inches gun turrets, each weighing 2,774 tons, began to break free from their mountings. At 14:14, Yamato's list reached 90 degrees. She was completely on her side, her massive hull still moving forward at several knots. Inside, hundreds of men were trapped in compartments that had become death traps. At 14:17, the forward magazines detonated. The explosion was visible 160 kilometers away in Kaiyu. A mushroom cloud rose 20,000 feet into the air, punching through the overcast. The blast wave knocked American aircraft out of control, caused minor damage to some flying too close. When the smoke cleared, Yamato was gone. Only debris and oil marked where the world's largest battleship had been moments before. Of Yamato's crew of 3,332 men, only 276 survived. Vice Admiral Ito, Captain Aruga, and most of the senior officers went down with the ship. The destroyer Yukazi and Futsuki rescued survivors despite continuing air attacks, their crews throwing everything that would float overboard for men in the water. The destroyer Kasumi, heavily damaged with her bow blown off, was scuttled by Fujitsuki's torpedoes. Isakaze, burning and dead in the water, was also scuttled. The light cruiser Yahagi sank at 14:05 after fighting magnificently against overwhelming odds. The final tally was devastating. 6 of 10 ships sunk. Approximately 4,137 Japanese sailors dead. The American losses, 10 aircraft, 12 aircrew. Carrier aviation had achieved in 2 hours what would have taken battleships a day-long engagement to accomplish, if they could have accomplished it at all. Task Force 58's success represented the maturation of carrier warfare doctrine, the coordination of strikes from multiple carriers, the concentration of attacks to overwhelm defenses, the tactical precision of targeting one side of the ship, all demonstrated American naval aviation at its zenith. 3.5 years after Pearl Harbor, the prophecy of air power advocates had been fulfilled in the most dramatic fashion possible. The psychological impact on the Imperial Navy was shattering. Yamato had been more than a ship. She was a symbol of Japan itself. The name Yamato was the ancient poetic name for Japan. Her loss represented not just military defeat, but spiritual collapse. Admiral Toyota would later write that Operation Tengo's failure marked the effective end of the Imperial Navy as a fighting force. Intelligence capabilities had provided crucial advantage throughout. American codebreakers had been reading Japanese naval communications, knowing about the sortie before some Japanese ship captains received their orders. Submarines were prepositioned, search patterns optimized, the element of surprise completely absent. Training standards reflected the industrial gap between the two nations. American pilots arriving in the Pacific in 1945 averaged 300 hours of flight training versus 100 hours for Japanese pilots. American squadrons rotated home after combat tours to train replacements. Japanese squadrons remained in combat until destroyed. The battle influenced post-war naval construction worldwide. Every major navy studied the engagement, recognizing that battleships were obsolete. Anti-aircraft defenses needed fundamental improvement, and radar and communications were as important as guns and armor. Admiral Mitscher's after-action report emphasized coordination as the key to success. 11 carriers launching strikes required precise timing to prevent mutual interference. The lessons learned would be applied in Korea 5 years later. Individual stories illuminated the tragedy. Inen Mitsuru Yoshida, one of Yamato's few surviving bridge officers, would later write about watching American pilots press home attacks through murderous anti-aircraft fire. Their courage equaled that of any samurai. Captain Tamakihira of the destroyer Yahagi survived her sinking, and would later write eloquently about the battle's futility. The strategic implications extended beyond the immediate tactical victory. Operation Tengo's failure meant Okinawa's defenders would receive no naval support. American casualties at Okinawa, over 50,000, might have been even higher if Yamato had succeeded in reaching the invasion beaches. Planning for the invasion of Japan was influenced by Yamato's destruction. If the Japanese would sacrifice their last battleship in a suicide mission, what would they do to defend the home islands? The atomic bomb used 4 months later was partially justified by the perceived willingness of Japan to accept unlimited casualties. The wreck of Yamato was discovered in 1985, broken into 2 main sections in 340 m of water. The bow section landed upright, the chrysanthemum crest still visible. The stern section was devastated by the magazine explosion. Modern analysis suggests Yamato took 11 to 13 torpedo hits and 6 to 8 bomb hits. The critical damage was the progressive flooding caused by multiple torpedo hits on the port side. Veterans' reunions brought together former enemies. In 1985, survivors from Yamato met with American pilots who had attacked her. Japanese survivors acknowledged the mission was futile from inception. American pilots expressed respect for the courage of men who sailed knowing they would not return. The memorial at Kure, Japan, where Yamato was built, draws thousands of visitors annually. Japanese come to honor the sacrifice of the crew. Americans visit to understand their former enemy. The museum emphasizes peace through remembering war's terrible price. Cultural depictions have shaped public memory. The 2005 Japanese film Yamato portrayed the crew's sacrifice as heroic but futile. Both Japanese and American perspectives contain truth. The battle was simultaneously a tragedy for the men who died and a demonstration of military evolution. The environmental impact continues today. An estimated 1,000 tons of fuel oil remains in Yamato's wreck, slowly leaking into the ocean. The wreck is considered a war grave, protected from salvage by international agreement. Educational programs worldwide use the battle to teach the importance of air superiority, the danger of fighting with obsolete doctrine, and the human cost of refusing to acknowledge defeat. Military minds study Operation Tenno as an example of how institutional pride can override tactical judgment. Technical analysis reveals the sophistication of American tactics. Torpedo bombers approached at specific angles to maximize hit probability. Dive bombers targeted communication and fire control systems. Fighters suppressed anti-aircraft positions in coordinated sequences. The attack was not a melee, but a carefully orchestrated operation. Weather played a crucial role. Low clouds prevented high-altitude bombing, forcing aircraft into anti-aircraft fire. Rain squalls provided concealment for torpedo bombers. Rough seas made damage control more difficult. Communication failures compounded Japanese difficulties. Yamato's radio antennas were destroyed early, preventing coordination. Flag signals were obscured by smoke. The breakdown of communications accelerated the collapse of organized resistance. Leadership styles reflected service cultures. Mitscher acted aggressively, launching strikes without explicit authorization. Ito followed orders despite personal reservations. Aruga executed his duty without question. Each decision shaped the battle's outcome. In the depths of the East China Sea, Yamato rests in pieces, her massive guns silent, her crew entombed within her hull. The battle is past, but its lessons endure. Technology determined capability. Courage could not overcome material disadvantage. Pride led to destruction. The destruction of Battleship Yamato marked not just the end of the battleship era, but the beginning of wisdom about war's true nature. Operation Tenno failed in its tactical objective but succeeded in demonstrating the futility of fighting wars with obsolete concepts. That demonstration, written in the lives of 4,137 Japanese sailors and 12 Americans, stands as Yamato's final service to humanity. A warning about the cost of war that echoes across the decades to our own.